Please pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, for you are our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Many of you probably remember Hans Christian Andersen's marvelous children's story, The Emperor's New Clothes. Now, Andersen wrote the story based on an old folk tale that is common in many cultures, and it's a little different in every culture. But Andersen's tale tells the story of an insecure ruler who hides his insecurities behind an air of pomp and circumstance. The emperor is known far and wide for his love of clothes, so much so that the joke is often made that the emperor isn't to be found in his throne room, but rather in his dressing room. Those luxurious and expensive clothes brought tremendous comfort to the monarch, but they would also be the source of his undoing. Two grifters heard about the emperor's love for his fine clothes and decide to pose as expert tailors to take advantage of the ruler and swindle him out of his money. They arrive at the capital announcing that they have the most exquisite fabrics and threads, including a unique fabric and thread that are only visible to those who are truly wise and discerning. Of course, the emperor is absolutely enamored with the idea of those special materials and is determined to have an elaborate new suit of clothes made from them as soon as possible. And so he immediately contracts the would-be tailors to prepare it. For 2 weeks, the men appear to labor long hours at the castle, laboring over their efforts, and the emperor is so excited and soon sends his chief advisor to take a look at the progress the two are making. When the advisor arrives, he is shocked to see the two men laboring over what appears to be empty equipment. There is no fabric, no thread to be seen. The advisor quickly realizes that if he were to reveal that he can't see the materials, he'll be at risk of losing his position. Instead, he feigns marvel at the beautiful fabric and the exquisite thread and the incredible design, and then reports back to the emperor that the suit will be the most impressive ever seen. And the emperor is ecstatic. The completion of the suit nears. The palace announces that the emperor will hold a parade to celebrate its completion. The people of the city are aware of the supposed mystical nature of the fabric and anxiously anticipating seeing who among their neighbors is wise and who among them is foolish. When the would-be tailors inform the emperor that the suit is completed, he is thrilled. That is, until they walk into his dressing room with the suit. The emperor is devastated to see nothing in their hands, but he quickly hides his disappointment out of fear that others will think him unwise and foolish. Donning the invisible suit, the emperor strides forth to lead the parade, determined to walk confidently among his people and to show off the suit that has cost him so much. Residents of the capital are just as determined to prevent the emperor from knowing that they also can't see the suit. They ooh and ah as the monarch walks through the crowd. And then one small child cries out, "The emperor has no clothes!" The child's parents try to silence the youngster, but the emperor's face turns the deepest red. He knows that the child has spoken truth, and yet he keeps on walking, determined to finish the parade. That one child of all the wise and learned individuals around the emperor has the courage to speak truth. Jesus is that voice in today's gospel reading. He's just called his first disciples and now leads them from the shores of the Sea of Galilee into the town of Capernaum, located just a little further down the shore. This is probably where Simon and Andrew and James and John lived with their families. When the Sabbath comes, Jesus goes to the synagogue, as he will do throughout his life. There he stands up to preach, and people are amazed. They're absolutely astounded by the passion and the conviction with which Jesus speaks. You see, religious leaders in Jesus' time were seldom known to speak with definitiveness. They most often presented various points of view from different scholarly schools and then left the congregation to converse about them. Argument was seen as holy in that tradition. But Jesus doesn't just present ideas for debate. He turns the tradition of the scribes on its head by pointedly announcing the imminent presence of God's reign and rule, inviting hearers to change their hearts and minds, giving themselves to the work of God in their midst. The people are simply not used to being presented with the idea that they have a role to play in transforming the world. In the midst of Jesus' sermon, a person in the audience cries out in opposition, "What do you want from us? You're the Holy One of God." Mark tells us that the individual is held captive by an unclean spirit, but this person also functions as the embodiment of opposition that Jesus will face in bringing change. Institutions and power do not give way without resistance. Jesus knows that, and he quickly counters, "Be silent. Set this person free." At once the individual is racked by convulsions, and then crying loudly, the unclean spirit leaves the person, and the person is at peace. People gathered in the synagogue are shocked. They've seen faith healers come and go, generally charlatans seeking attention and profit, but they have seen in Jesus something more. He preaches truth and refuses to back down when challenged by powers and authorities. What is this? He speaks with conviction and has the power to overcome every evil. Word begins to spread far and wide. There is a new teacher who isn't afraid of those in power. People begin to take notice. This story foreshadows the coming conflict Jesus will have with the religious and political leaders who will fear his courage and the crowds that follow him. It also illustrates the way Jesus will deal with the lies that keep people locked in poverty and exploitation at the hands of the powers that be of this world. Jesus will speak truth. He will show compassion. Jesus will set those in bondage free and bring healing to broken relationships. That's the kind of leadership for which the people of God have always yearned, the kind that they had not seen in that time since the time of the prophets. But it was the kind promised by God in the words of Deuteronomy, which we heard read today. God is always at work raising up gifted leaders among humankind, leaders who will speak truth to power and draw into healing community those who have been pushed to the margins of this world. Paul reflects on the importance of that kind of leadership when he reminds Christians at Corinth that all of us must be sensitive to the struggles of the most vulnerable among us. We must strive to never do anything to cause them to stumble, but rather we must hold our own freedom in check in order to put the needs of others first. Our world seems as hungry as ever for that kind of leadership. Words of truth, acts of kindness, and concern for the most vulnerable have been far too rare over these last few years. Some of our fellow citizens have been taken captive by lies uttered by those in positions of power. They have all too often been willing to forsake their own values and go along with cruelty done in the name of power. There's a clear parallel in our history, of course. Those of you old enough or interested enough in history will remember the era of Senator Joseph McCarthy, who led an inquisition into the influence of communism in virtually every area of American society in the 1950s. McCarthy was convinced that anyone who disagreed with him, who questioned the status quo, was collaborating with the Soviets. He held televised hearings on Capitol Hill accusing countless politicians and artists and average citizens of betraying their country. McCarthy caused such an uproar that fears of socialism swept across the country and indeed the globe. People began to look at their friends and family, their friends, their neighbors, even their family, with suspicion. Many lost their livelihood and freedom, and some even their lives. There seemed to be no end to McCarthy's reign of terror. And then veteran journalist Edward R. Murrow stepped forward. Against tremendous opposition from leadership at CBS, the network for which he worked, and in the face of threats against his own safety, Murrow produced an episode of See It Now, his weekly regular newscast, that directly confronted Senator McCarthy. Using the senator's own words against him, on March 9, 1954, Murrow challenged viewers to put aside their fears and remember that dissent and debate are two cardinal virtues of American society. He said, "Nations have lost their freedom while preparing to defend it. And if we in this country confuse dissent with disloyalty, we deny the right to be wrong." Murrow's report jolted the American public out of its fearful nightmare and brought an end to McCarthy's grip on power. Just a few months after it aired, the Senate censured McCarthy, effectively ending his career. That didn't make up for the damage that he'd done, of course, and it didn't prevent Murrow from suffering for his conscience and his actions. Within a year, he too would be out of a job, having become too political for advertisers and thus a liability to the leadership of the network. But without Murrow's courage and willingness to risk everything, how many more lives would have been ruined or lost? His willingness to speak truth to power brought freedom to a nation and a world. In the face of the conspiracy theories and half-truths that grip our nation and the world today, we are challenged to find the same courage to act that Murrow did. We must speak the truth to those held in bondage by lies. Jesus reminds us that it can be done with conviction and compassion. The words that we speak may bring life and hope to those held captive and transformative healing to our world. Amen. Our song of response